Hello and welcome to The Download from Wise Woman and Wordsmith, where insight meets inspiration. A space for creatives, dreamers and visionaries ready to spark new ideas, ignite purpose and reimagine possibilities. Here we share downloads of wisdom, stories and strategies to help you thrive in your creative journey. I'm your host, Jill Marshall. Tune in, connect and let the magic unfold.
Show you tomorrow.
Hello and welcome back to The Download. Today I want to explore an idea that feels both deeply personal and potentially universal. It's been taking form in me for a while, the way that sometimes creative things do, and it's the sense that our lives aren't just shaped by our choices or even by our parents' influence, but by a set of layers stretching far back into time. I'm beginning to think of it as a three-layered map. The imprint, the wound, the archetype. Each layer contributes to the story that we live out, and each one must be recognised if we are to move towards what Jung called individuation, becoming who we truly are. So let's start with the imprint. This is what I would call the ancestral echo. It's the theme, if you like, that hums through our family story across generations, many generations. Most, arguably all, families have one. For some it's poverty, for others entitlement, for some chronic ill health, for others resilience or resourcefulness, or musicality, or something positive. We can think of Imprint as a family theme song. It doesn't necessarily begin with trauma, but with repetition, patterns that become so familiar they set the stage for what we expect life to be. A powerful example could be the Irish famine imprint. Generations who endured starvation and loss created descendants who, even in times of plenty, often carry the echo of scarcity, saving scraps, mistrusting abundance, fearing it would all vanish. Children and grandchildren who actually never went hungry still felt hunger in their bones. They grew up expecting life to be precarious and with survival never guaranteed. We see similar themes in immigrant families, the imprint of survival, children taught never to waste, to work twice as hard to be accepted, or the imprint of exile, a sort of cellular sense of not belonging, even generations later, or the imprint of resilience, the remarkable capacity to rebuild after uprooting. My mother began doing hardcore genealogy decades ago, before Who Do You Think You Are and Ancestry.com were even a twinkle in some producer or tech specialist's eye. She can winkle out information from parish records and uncover mysteries that have not been solved for generations through her incredible sleuthing. Thanks to these professorial levels of research into our family history on both sides, we know that our imprint is basically of labour and hardship. We worked in fields for someone else, or on ships and battlefields for someone else, and in mills and factories for someone else, and then occasionally in business, mainly for someone else. There are only a few examples of ancestors who did anything outside these general patterns, and quite often they didn't thrive. The key is that imprints create expectations of life. That could be life is a struggle, money never lasts, we don't belong here, or conversely, we always land on our feet. These are not beliefs in the conscious sense. They are just the unspoken atmospheres we grow up inside, as normal as air. And what about those who step outside the imprint? The family outliers? As just mentioned, some suffer, feeling punished or excluded for betraying the family theme. A child who leaves the area they were born in instead of suffering that family's imprinted expectations, for instance, may carry shame, as though they've abandoned the tribe. Some revel, flinging themselves into freedom, but sometimes overcompensating, denying their roots completely, or swinging back into some form of arrogance. Some slip back when life gets hard, or when it gets too good, pulled by the gravitational force of the family field. The child of poverty who becomes wealthy may, under stress, revert to scarcity patterns, hoarding or mistrusting. And some thrive, not by rejecting the imprint, but by integrating it. They honour the lessons, recognise the atmosphere, and consciously choose another path. These are the true lineage transformers, the ones who don't just escape the imprint but transmute it into something new for generations to come. Carl Jung might say this is one expression of the collective unconscious, the vast field of archetypal patterns within which our family develops its own repeating motifs. Ursula Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction comes to mind here. We each inherit a bag filled with these themes. We don't choose what's in it. We're born holding it. But it is our task, perhaps, to look inside and decide what to keep, what to release, and what to transform. And if you're a writer, as with Ursula Le Guin, you may investigate all these themes in your books. So then we come to part 2. Layered over the imprint comes the wound. If imprint is the theme song, wound is that piercing note. It's the specific rupture, the family tragedy, the silenced story. Take Mark Wallin's excellent book, It Didn't Start With You, which I've mentioned before. It's a fascinating and illuminating read. It's filled with examples of family trauma revisited, like a granddaughter who feels an unnameable terror and claustrophobia that turns out to echo her grandmother's internment in a concentration camp, a grandson haunted by guilt that traces back to a great-uncle's wartime desertion, or a great-nephew who was suddenly haunted by dark depression at the age of 19, not knowing that this was the age a forebear had tragically died. These are sharper, more localised traumas than the broad theme of imprint. Carolyn Myss has long taught that wounds are initiations, that they force us into deeper awareness of the contracts that we carry. Robert Ohotto adds that wounds don't just sit there, they shape the archetypal patterns that emerge in us. And here's the key difference. While imprint sets expectations, what feels normal or somehow inevitable, the wound creates a jagged place where that normality collapses. In my own family story, I suspect there's a witch wound on one side, women diminished, shamed, or even made invisible, and perhaps a war wound on the other, men lost to violence and women left to manage and pick up the pieces. As a result, again, of my mum's epic research, we can almost pinpoint when some of these tragedies occurred. But these are not just historic incidents, they are atmospheric. They seep into our DNA, our family culture, the way we relate to power, visibility, survival, and even love. The psychologist Murray Bowen, who developed family systems theory, argued that unresolved trauma in one generation inevitably shows up in the next until it is consciously addressed. He called it multi-generational transmission. And in my words, the wound doesn't heal itself. It waits for someone willing to name it and stare it in the face. And then comes the third layer, the archetype, where imprint is the theme and wound is the sharp break. Archetype is the role we step into, the mask we wear in response. Carl Jung himself noticed this in his own life. He wrote about how the wise old man archetype haunted his dreams and visions long before he himself was old, and look what he became when he became old. He also wrestled with the archetype of the eternal youth, the Peter Pan if you like, realising how it influenced his vitality but also his immaturity. Archetypes for Jung were not just abstract symbols, they were living forces shaping him as much as they shaped his patients. So other examples could include the martyred mother, born from a lineage of silenced women and a wound of abandonment. The exile, shaped by generations of displacement, stepping unconsciously into the role of the outsider. Or the warrior, carrying the wound of conflict, but embodying it as constant struggle. Or perhaps the trickster, often the family outlier, breaking the imprint through subversion. Maureen Murdoch's heroine's journey maps how women step into archetypal roles shaped by patriarchal culture, rejecting then reclaiming the feminine. And Robert Ohotto describes how the shadow rescuer, or the invisible child, are direct expressions of family imprints and wounds. To my mind, we have a host of them, collected in the Congress-type gathering of our subconscious, and it's up to us to identify them and then decide whether we're allowing them forward to play on the stage or we're benching them completely, just to remind us they're there, but not to dominate our actions and indeed our beingness any longer. The point is, archetypes emerge at the intersection. They're the crystallization of the theme plus the trauma. They are how the echo of ancestry and the sting of tragedy get played out in us. I also believe we probably have one or two dominant archetypes who are the culmination of imprint, wound, and personal experience of how these two things appear to us in our lives. And it's these few who really conduct the whole show of our lives until and unless we're willing to notice it. To bring this all together, I want to share a dream I once had. One that honestly felt less like a dream and more like a memory. It was very real, vivid, lucid almost, and I was definitely living in it rather than outside it. I haven't yet found this in my mother's research, but it could one day be revealed, so let's wait and see. So anyway, in whatever this was, I was an aristocratic man during the French Revolution. I was moving happily through a market, greeting all the stallholders. They all knew me, and I joked and laughed with several of them and asked about the kids and so on. And then when the revolutionaries came for me, because of my wealth and my power, it was those same stallholders who hid me under the stall and then helped me and my family escape to England. There I became very specifically a leather worker. I kept my head down, I was cheerful, poor, and grateful to be alive, but I never again in my entire life alluded to who I once was. When I look at that story now, it's a perfect illustration of these three layers. First, the imprint, the theme of exile and survival through invisibility, the sense that safety lies in modesty, gratitude, keeping your head down, working hard. The wound, the trauma of being persecuted for visibility, for wealth, for power. The lesson that to be seen, and also to be rich, is to be endangered. And the archetype, the roles that crystallize, the exile, the humble worker, the cheerful survivor. That one story carries all three layers, the echo, the rupture, and the mask. And it reminds me that we can live out patterns from our ancestry, from our culture, even from what feels like our soul's own long history. And, importantly, it shows that once we see these patterns, we no longer have to live them unconsciously. Naming the imprint, acknowledging the wound, recognizing the archetype, that is the first act of transformation. So, what do we do with this knowledge? Jung would say we must individuate, integrate the unconscious into consciousness. As he famously said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. But I suspect there's a stage before individuation can be sustainable. We have to de-layer. We have to see the imprint, name the wound, recognise those conducting archetypes. Otherwise, we're forever caught in what Caroline Myss calls the dramas of power, reenacting stories that aren't truly ours, carrying contracts we never consciously signed. When we do the work of delayering, we begin to notice how these roles play out in mirrors and shadows, in the people around us, in the cast of characters we form, in the play of our lives. For instance, the exile who always feels like an outsider, even in loving relationships. The warrior who turns every workplace into a battlefield. The martyred mother who sacrifices joy for obligation. Or the trickster who sabotages their own success to prove they can beat the system. And when we bring them into the light, the archetype shifts. The victim becomes the survivor, and possibly the teacher. The rescuer becomes the healer. The exile becomes the seeker. The trickster becomes the innovator. And it's also a very joyful recognition that everyone's going through this to some degree. So sometimes the drama you're about to pick up and carry is absolutely not your own. And while you're working on your own individuation, the other person may be in some loop that you're not aware of and can't influence anyway. In that case, all you can really do is leave that drama with that person or people, with love and blessings, and perhaps take that particular heavy weight out of your knapsack and lighten the load. As Laura Day says in The Prism, that's no new damage to you and no bad feelings to the other. And then amazingly, you will see this particular type of drama far less, if at all. This is the alchemy. This is the transmutation of psychic lead into gold. So here's my own suggestion, and perhaps the seed of future research for me. See, my mum's own archetype is passed on to me. Here's my notion. I think individuation is only sustainable when we have worked through all three layers. 1, the imprint, the ancestral echo. 2, the wound, the family tragedy. And 3, the archetype, the personal role we've taken on. When we only address the archetype, we can slip back, because the wound beneath it is still raw. When we only heal the wound, the imprint still hums away in our DNA. But when we see and integrate all three, something extraordinary happens. We become free to write our own story. We achieve what I'm calling sustainable individuation. And I don't think it's any coincidence that for me, the layering takes the form of 3 acts or 3 peaks of activity and a climax or a denouement, because it very much relates to one of my archetypes, the writer. So in very stark contrast to the imprint and the wound of my lineage, I may well produce this thought in the shape of both a doctorate and a novel as I continue on my own delayered individuation journey. So I want to leave you with some questions for reflection. Firstly, what imprint runs through your lineage? Is it poverty, privilege, exile, resilience? What expectations of life has this set up? And it won't just be in you, it'll be in the rest of your family, so you will see it if you look around. Now you've seen those expectations, can you turn them around or accept them and love them? Then, what wound sits like a scar in your family story? Is it war, persecution, addiction, shame? Who needs forgiving? And who needs to be celebrated? And then, what archetype have you unconsciously lived out as a result? Is it the exile, the martyred mother, the trickster, something else? What could they become in your congress of support? And who, right now, needs to be benched? And most importantly, what might healing look like if you tended to all 3 layers instead of just one? This is deep work. It's also joyful work. Because when we clear these layers, we don't just free ourselves, we free our ancestors, we free our descendants. As Carolyn Myss says, your biography becomes your biology. And as Jung would add, your shadow, once integrated, becomes your greatest source of life. So may we all have the courage to look, to heal, and to become, not just for ourselves, but for the generations on either side of us. Thanks for tuning in to the Download podcast. Feel free to like, comment, and share, and all of that good stuff. Also, I'd love to hear more about your own intuitive hits and downloads, so do find us on Facebook, YouTube, and more.